Turns out the internet doesn't cast nearly as wide a net as we might think. Yes, half of us have fairly reliable service. Not so the other half. Our cover story is reported by David Pogue.
After earning her master's degree, writer Carrie Fugit bought this little farm in rural Oregon.
Can I borrow that? Yeah.
It seemed to have everything: beauty, affordability, and just a 30-minute drive to the city. But she quickly discovered one thing that wasn't available.
We don't have internet. We haven't been successful getting it out here yet.
So you must be able to get online somehow. What have you been doing?
When there isn't a pandemic, I go to a library or I go to a restaurant or a cafe. Now, since the pandemic, all of those places are closed down. If I need internet, Taco Bell has been very reliable.
So you're a professional writer, and to get online to do your research or your correspondence, you park at a Taco Bell?
I do. And I don't feel like a professional writer when I'm parked at a Taco Bell. I usually feel pretty embarrassed.
As modern Americans, we count among our blessings that most of us have been able to keep going through the pandemic, doing our work, teaching our kids, seeing our doctors, thanks to broadband internet. That is, high-speed internet. There's only one problem.
Tens of millions of Americans are not connected to broadband internet.
The digital divide affects every region of our country.
Gigi Sohn worked for the FCC during the Obama administration. How many Americans still don't have broadband?
Depends on who you ask. If you ask the Federal Communications Commission, they'll say it's only something along the lines of 23 million people, and that is a grossly undercounted number. Microsoft has done a study that showed 162 million Americans don't have broadband at the speeds that the FCC defines broadband.
If you're scoring at home, that's about half the population with either very slow internet or none at all. Why does the FCC so hugely undercount the number of people?
What the FCC says is, if you can serve one person in a census block, that means you're serving everybody in a census block.
Census blocks are map regions that the government uses for reporting population. A census block can be anything from one city block to hundreds of square miles in rural areas. If I'm the FCC and there's 5,000 people living in a census block and one guy has broadband internet, I can record that as 5,000 people?
Oh, I'm sure it's not only possible, I'm sure that is absolutely the case.
But having no broadband internet isn't the whole problem. Millions of communities have broadband, according to the FCC, but in the real world, it's too slow to matter. This is the fastest internet speed available in America. This is the average speed, and this is what the FCC defines as broadband. It's not very fast. They'd love to have that minimal speed here in Georgetown, Maine. The FCC says that this coastal community has broadband internet because residents can sign up for DSL service. That's digital subscriber line, basically internet over the phone wires. But in practice,
it's terrible. It is absolutely awful. Most of the time we have little to none, and only occasionally does it get up to mediocre. It's really bad.
Resident Tommy Burke says that it got even worse once everyone started staying at home during the pandemic, and worse yet, once the summer residents arrived at their vacation homes.
The fact that lots of people are up here now that aren't normally here all the time, the internet is even worse.
Together, we'll review what we know.
As the new school year begins, many students will be taking classes remotely over the internet. But for Maine residents like high schooler Kiernan Mann, that's often impossible.
Taking notes in class with the internet is pretty hard because the screen might freeze and I can't hear anybody, and then they might just go through all the notes without me and I have to catch up.
In cities like Austin, Texas, so many kids weren't online last semester that the school system had to print and mail 40,000 homework packets a week. And they resorted to filling school buses with portable Wi-Fi hotspots and parking them near apartment complexes where a lot of people have no broadband service. Now, you might say, Austin? Shining star of high-tech American cities? But according to Gigi Sohn, Austin illustrates the biggest broadband problem of all.
The vast majority of Americans who don't have broadband internet access is because they can't afford it, because the price is too high.
And sure enough, the U.S. has the third most expensive broadband internet in the developed world, mostly because there's not much competition.
It's just a money problem and not a problem of putting wires in the ground.
Well, we should be complaining about both. The lack of actual network infrastructure in many places, but also the cost.
The thing is, we've fixed problems like this before.
In 1934, only 11% of rural Americans had electricity. President Franklin Roosevelt created the Rural Electrification Administration.
New lines going up almost everywhere at the rate of 500 miles a day.
And within 20 years, 90% of those homes had cheap, reliable electricity.
Now, over the years, the government has come up with a basket of programs designed to help with internet affordability and accessibility. Unfortunately, Sohn says they haven't always worked as designed.
The FCC has now, for well over a decade, paid out tens of billions of dollars to rural broadband companies to build internet access in places where there isn't any. And the fact of the matter is that the government has gotten a very, very poor return on its investment. This FCC, and I'll even say, the FCC that I worked for, has not done a very good job of demanding that these companies tell us what they've actually built with the money they've gotten.
This is not making the FCC look too good.
I don't think it's incompetence. I think part of it is resources. The FCC's staff has shrunk enormously in the last decade or so.
Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
FCC Chairman Ajit Pai declined our request for an interview. But in a written response, the FCC says, "We ensure efficient, cost-effective spending on subsidies for rural broadband." Earlier this year, Congress passed a law requiring the FCC to improve the way it measures internet access. But the FCC says that nothing will happen unless Congress also pays for it.
The FCC simply does not have the $65 million we need to start the process and implement that law through its first year.
Meanwhile, the agency is promoting new technologies like 5G cellular and low Earth orbit satellites that might address our broadband problems. Someday. But for now, most seem to agree on one thing, that especially these days, the internet should be considered a necessity. Months into the pandemic, Carrie Fugit ended up getting office space in town just to go online.
I think at this point it should be considered a utility, just like water or electricity. And especially now that we've experienced this pandemic, we're seeing just how much we rely on it. The difference between someone who has internet connection and someone who doesn't is just too wide.